You guys remember we left off here yesterday, right? We talked about how the green beetles died off, which led us to the brown beetles. Yes? Yes. Okay. So, kind of catch us up here a little bit. Gage, help me out, right? Help us kind of conclude yesterday.
Yeah.
Why are there so many more brown beetles than green beetles in this situation?
Because the green beetles died off.
Why?
Because they were eaten by birds.
And why would that mean more brown beetles? Are they more suited for this environment or less suited?
They're more suited for the environment because of the environmental factors.
Very good.
The predators.
What we're looking for there is adaptation.
Yeah.
So that leads us to what we're going to be talking about today. Species unable to adapt to a changing environment are more likely to become extinct. Brett, tell me why. Species unable to adapt to a changing environment are more likely to become extinct. Why? Brett, let's take a look here at this image, right? When we look at these extinct mammals, what about them seems to be something that isn't so suitable today? Okay?
Well, the American lion is an interesting one because obviously there aren't lions in America.
That's right. What about these animals seems to be something that isn't suitable for the modern?
The environment that they were in obviously changed. That's my point. Like,
Mhm.
that Americans and lions don't really make sense. You know what I mean? So,
That's true.
so what must have happened is that there must have been a change in the environment. So at a certain point, it must have been suitable for the American lion.
So what about these animals that you see here was suitable for the previous environment? Each of these animals existed during the Ice Age.
Yeah. So the way the globe was, the temperature of the globe, the certain environmental conditions were favorable. The larger animals probably.
There you go.
Animals with probably more fat. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And when the globe was forming in this period of time, that to end the ice age, they really could have changed and slowed down. So.
Okay, more or less, you're dancing around it, you're pretty much there. These are all very big animals, right? Covered in this very dense hide, which was great for the Ice Age. It didn't do so good for them as the environment started to change, right? So either these animals died out, or we kind of lend a hand with some of them.
Isn't what I said yesterday about the Paleo Indians punching them by the end of the Ice Age because they were slow, they didn't have a lot of meat. That's what I meant by it. Because like what you guys are saying, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Because like it didn't do so good for them.
That's right.
And like plus the ancestors of Americans hunting them, because it all comes together.
You got it, man.
Create their extinction.
You got it. All right. Charles Darwin observed about 15 species of finches on the Galapagos Islands. All of them evolved from ancestral species. These birds were isolated on different islands. Although nearly identical to the mainland finches, their beaks have adapted to the type of food they ate in order to fill different niches on the island. We'll talk what niches are tomorrow. But for now, let's take a look here, right? So, are we all familiar with Darwin? We all know who he is? Yes. Yeah, right? The father of evolution. When we look here, right, we can see that there are finches on all of these islands. But these finches, as these islands started to spread apart, weren't able to get back to their original environment, right? So they had to do exactly what the organisms that we talked about yesterday had to do. They either adapted or they died out, right? You either change with the environment or you die. So when we look over here at Darwin's finches, you can see that each of these organisms is pretty much the same thing, but with one key difference, right? Ante, what is so different about each of these finches?
I think they're eating something else, I don't know, plants, insects, seeds, and everything.
That's right. So these big, larger beaks, right, are perfect for seeds. These beaks over here are great for insects, but these guys are even better for tools, right? You kind of see all the way around the wheel, each beak does a certain job. These finches all come from one common ancestor. They're not too different from each other, but the beaks serve a different use, right? This guy's going to do really good here, maybe not so good here. Does that make sense? Now, one of the interesting things that we could see on these islands is that for the birds that inhabit multiple different environments, when there's times of famine, right? So let's say that the seed population is very low, and they're living alongside these guys right here. So one side of the island, you got a lot of seeds, the other side of the island, you got a lot of insects, right? If the seed population is really low that year, what species, what type of finches would you expect to see less of next year? The seeds, right? They're not reproducing, they're not eating. Same thing with the insects, right? If for whatever reason there's some form of famine and they can't eat the insects, what would you expect to see a lot of in the next generation? Those larger beaks, right? The reason being is because they're the ones that they won the game, right? So it's like they're playing Monopoly and they made it all the way to the finish line. As they reproduce to make more finches, they're going to carry on that genetic trait because that was the thing that was most useful at the time. Or what we talked about yesterday, right? When we're talking about adaptation, or we're talking about evolution, it's the thing that works best then. That's why certain organisms go extinct as they progress. Does that make sense so far? So now I've got a couple questions for you. You guys can take a look up at the TV. We're going to see if we can take the knowledge that we gained from yesterday and a little bit today and see if we can apply it to these questions here. The scientist has collected data about 4 bird species living in the same environment. The table lists the size of each population and the diet of each species. I'll let you guys take a look at the chart here. Be wonderful scientists. An insecticide was sprayed in the environment and killed many of the beetles. Which bird species would be most likely to survive this environmental change? Don't say it out loud. Give yourself a second, look at the chart, and you decide. When you think you have the answer, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll see what you got. Hold on. Nico, what do you think? Species A, B, C, or D?
C.
Species C. What's that?
I agree.
Okay. Raise your hand if you agree with Nico and Emerson. And species C will be most likely to survive. Ren, why species C? Okay, right here. What about this one makes this species most likely to survive is change in environment? Take your time. Ren, when we look at the numbers of birds, right? Is species C the highest or the lowest? What's that? It is. And when we look at all these other species here, right? They eat one thing. Species C eats 2 different things, right? Seeds and beetles, right? Why do you think that matters? Brett? Help Brett.
Because if you, if the birds eat all the beetles, then they'll go extinct.
Mm-hmm.
They just eat beetles, but if they're eating other insects like beetles.
Very good. We see this all the time throughout history, right? We would expect these numbers to go down because obviously there's less food. But they have what's needed to survive this change in environment, right? A great example would be during the Permian Extinction. Massive amounts of organisms were wiped out. But there was just this pocket of animals that were able to adapt because their food source was different than what was kind of like the main food source for other organisms. Great example being Listersaurus. Any questions, comments, or concerns so far? Okay, good job. Yes, species C. If a new predator is introduced to the population, how will this most likely affect the coloration of the population over time? Before you figure out your answer, let me read this thing here at the top. Male guppies exhibit variations in color, ranging from bright to dull. While the dull guppies camouflage better than with the sand, the bright guppies are more attracted to female mates. The chart below shows the distribution of body brightness of male guppies in the population. So the bright ones are really attractive to females, but the dull ones can camouflage better. If a new predator is introduced to the environment, what do you think is going to happen? Give yourself a second, look over it. I'll be calling on you in just a second to tell me what you think. Deshaun, ready? We have A, the number of dull individuals will increase. B, the number of bright individuals will increase. C, the bright individuals will develop duller colorations. And D, the dull individuals will develop brighter colorations. Deshaun, which one do you think it is?
I think it's the.
You think it's D? D as in dog? Okay. D, the dull individuals will develop bright colorations. Can you explain why?
I guess the brighter colors would try to scare off the predator.
Okay, so maybe they're using that bright coloration to fend off the predators somehow, right? All right, but let's remember, these guys have never seen these types of predators before. This is new, this is an invasive species. Gage?
So it would be, I would say B.
B as in boy?
B as in boy.
B as in boy, the number of bright individuals will increase. Why?
Well, I would say, because so with the text we just read,
Mm-hmm.
this is that the dull guppies can camouflage better. Well, actually, no, my bad here. Because it's the predator introduced into the population.
Mm-hmm.
So the predator, just like the beetles, if the predator is introduced to the population, then the bright guppies are going to be killed off, even though they have a higher, reproduction rate.
So what answer do you think is the correct
So
answer?
I would say A. Yeah.
A, the number of dull individuals will increase. Gage is correct. A is the correct answer here.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yep. And the reason being is just like he was saying, right? Though the bright individuals were attractive to the female guppies, right? That suited the environment at the time. Remember, we were talking about natural selection, right? It doesn't work all the time, but it did for a while. But now there's this new invasive predator. So those bright guppies aren't going to stand a chance. So what's going to happen is the only ones that are going to start to reproduce are the dull ones, the ones that are better camouflaged with their environment. So normally I have some students say that it's C. The bright guppies are going to change to this dull coloration. And that's just not how it works, right? They're not all of a sudden going to spontaneously like, oh, and start to make themselves a different color. That's not how it works. It'll take, okay, we're going to talk about that. In terms of like these big evolutionary changes, yes, that's millions of years of adaptation. But we can see small changes in generations. So for example, the dull guppies, right? Only the dull guppies are going to be reproducing. So we're going to see a change in that environment very quickly. It's small, but it is an evolutionary adaptation. Now, they might evolve to be better suited for this predator, but that's going to be millions of years of trial and error. Yes?
So does the color matter to say like the guppies, like say like all the orange guppies die off,
Mm-hmm.
and then say the dull guppies increase?
Mhm.
Does that change anything, or is it just it doesn't matter? It's just the color of them.
So in this situation here, it would appear that the bright coloration is the thing that's most suitable to finding a mate, right? Good example would be peacocks, right? Male peacocks have this big, bright kind of show, right? They kind of puff themselves up and they walk around and, hey, look at me, ladies, look at this big coloration that I have. Whereas the female peacock doesn't have any of that, right? It seems to be something that's favorable in terms of male to female in that situation, and that's for a multitude of reasons, right? In this situation, it's probably suited the same need, right? The coloration is displaying some form of, I don't know, maybe, hey, I'm able to find food. Look at me, I'm bright. Whereas dull coloration might mean something else. But in here, there's a new invasive predator. So they need to learn how to adapt to this change. And the best way to adapt is to just stay out of the way for now. Because remember, evolution is a thing that works right now. It might not work next time, but right now it works. All right. Which of these statements best explains how transitional fossils support the theory of evolution? A. Transitional fossils show traits common to ancestors as well as descendants. B. Transitional fossils show how the organism's characteristics remain the same over time. C. Transitional fossils show how individual organisms can change their characteristics during their lifetime. D. Transitional fossils show how populations of past organisms were not able to change their characteristics over time. Before you come up with your answer, let me go ahead and read this for you, and then you can make your educated assumption. Scientists who search for fossils often use the term transitional fossils to describe some of their finds. An example of transitional fossils is Dimetrodon, which lived 280 to 265 million years ago. Dimetrodon had a lizard-like appearance, but had a sail-like structure sticking out of its back that allowed it to regulate its body temperature, an ability that is found today in modern warm-blooded mammals. While Dimetrodon swallowed its prey whole like reptiles do, it also had differentiated type of teeth, a trait also common to mammals today. So, give yourself a moment, take a look at these answers, and use this as your guide. Give you guys a moment to come up with your answer. Casper, what do you think? A, B,
I'm
C,
not sure.
What's that?
I'm not sure.
All right, well, let's take a look at them together, right? We just learned about Dimetrodon, right? And we know that Dimetrodon had traits that are still present today, meaning that somewhere along the line, that trait kept moving on, right? Because we have that now. We can regulate our body temperature. So when we look at each of these answers, which one most sounds like things moving on? C. Transitional fossils show how individual organisms can change their characteristics during their lifetimes. All right. So let's think about that logically for a second, right? Let's say aliens land today, right? And they let loose some kind of crazy human-eating lion tiger thing, right? Are we just all of a sudden going to sprout wings so that we can fly away? Well, it doesn't work that way, right? It'd be cool. But C is suggesting that you can just change on a dime, right? Like, uh-oh, I need to be able to breathe underwater, so let me evolve lungs right now. That's not really how evolution works, right? Millions of years of adaptation. So if you had to pick a different answer other than C.
So D.
B, transitional, D as in dog. Transitional fossils show how populations of past organisms were not able to change their characteristics over time. So when we think about D, right, let's dive into that one. They're not able to change over time. So that would say that there are still, like Dimetrodon today, right? Because if they don't change, they're still here, right?
So B.
So B, transitional fossils show how organisms' characteristics remain the same over time. All right, so dinosaurs are still walking around, and A. I don't know. Hey, are you sure you want to go with A?
Yeah.
Transitional fossils show traits common to ancestors as well as descendants. You know, the good thing that was your first guess. That is the correct answer. A, yes, very good. And what we see there, right, let's break that down. We have traits that are common to Dimetrodon. Dimetrodon existed a really long time ago. But the fact that those traits are still present in us today means that it kept being successful, right? But over millions and millions of years of evolution, those traits kind of splintered out into mammals today, right? So the reason why it's not all of these is because this is suggesting that either A, evolution doesn't happen, or B, it happens instantaneously. But what A is telling us is that we can see the gradual progression of organisms through the fossil record, right? We can see how things change and adapt each time there's some kind of new calamity. Does that make sense? Awesome. We're gonna end with this one. Scientists have observed that many animals share similar bone structures in their front limbs as shown below. what would scientists be able to infer from this observation? A, these animals live in similar environments, so they have evolved to have similar bone structures. B, these animals have the same bone structures in their front limbs because the structures serve the same function in each animal. C, the animals share a common ancestor and have evolved to fit the different environments in which they live. Or D, these animals have identical DNA sequences, so their bone structures are very similar as well. Let's see if you can come up with the right answer. Hold on.
I think I have something.
Hold on. I know you know. You're the dinosaur guy.
I know not. Not really, but
You know a lot about this stuff.
not really. I'm just.
Well, do you want to help us out with this one?
Some of the things is a little. Some of the things are obvious.
Okay. Well, help us out with this one. What do you think, Emerson?
Well. Sorry, I have to.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So if you ask me,
Uh-huh.
I think it's either probably. I'm not saying I'm right.
Okay.
But I think it's either it could be C or D.
Okay.
And I think D. Actually, these animals have identical DNA sequences. Their bone structures are very similar. Like that's happening like in traits. Like some people like they get autism like from traits or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, from, like not maybe not from traits, but like not a kind of trait. Like not. I mean like DNA. Like it's in their genes or something. It's just their genes were differently than their parents or something.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm just trying to give an example. but
That's okay. You have a good idea. I would say that you have some really interesting thinking, but we're not on the right path here because this would suggest that a bat's DNA is the same as a horse's DNA, and those are two animals are completely different,
Then
right?
it has to be C. It's different.
C. Gage, I saw that your hand just went down. Were you going to say C? Why C?
Well, because it's speaking to what you just said, that they are distinct.
Uh-huh.
All of those animals are distinct in their own ways. But when you see a trait that's common
Mhm.
amongst a wide variety of creatures, that gives you a pretty good indication that they had a common ancestor. Because you can understand that, they're all mammals, right?
Yes, they are.
And that would even include the whale.
Mhm.
Whales in the ocean, right? So
Mhm.
it's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So they have a similar bone structure. Why is that the case? Well, that's the case because they share a common ancestor.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the whale just was simply more of an oceanic type creature. And
Yes.
it so happened to have kept those traits as well.
Very good. If you guys take a look over here, right? When you look at a whale, you see a fin, right? But when we look at the bones, we can see that there are fingers within that fin.
They just not.
You look at a horse, that bone structure seems oddly familiar, does it not? Heck, look at a bat. Looks like just really long fingers, right? And wings. Each of these organisms look very different when you look at them. But if we're able to look at the fossils, if we're able to look at the bones that's left behind, we can see that somewhere along the line, something that was serving one purpose ended up serving many different purposes. That's how evolution works, right? You adapt to the environment. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden there's just like billions of different kind of like species. It just means that as the environment started to change and you had to change with it, you had to adapt these traits that were best suited for that. Now, does that mean that these traits are end all be all and they're going to be here forever? Absolutely not. But it means right now it works. Later on down the road, they will change again. And if evolution showed us anything, it's the impermanence of things. All right, so that brings us to your activity today.